It's not that they took me back to zero. They pushed me below zero. Until now, we're still lost.
And me too. My childhood home, the place I grew up in. Every corner I used to turn to, every memory I would revisit. It all collapsed with the walls of the house. Today's podcast episode is about Home Beyond Walls. We'll hear two stories, one from 15 years ago and the other, my own story, from just 2 years ago. Thought lived at different times and by different people. They carry the same emotions, the same pain, and the same resilience.
I'm Firas, from a village called Al-Funduq in Qalayqilia.
Al-Funduq is a village in the Kalkili city, in the northern part of the occupied West Bank.
I got married in 2001 and first lived with my family in a small house, 80 square meters. In 2006, I bought a piece of land in the village. Honestly, I didn't even have enough money at the time. I sold part of my wife's gold just to afford the land. 3 years later, I started building. But in September 2009, I was handed an Israeli order to stop construction. The house wasn't even finished yet. I immediately hired a lawyer, and he told me, if you manage to move into the house within a month, you'll be safe.
Safe, in other words, Firas believed his house wouldn't be demolished. But let me give you some context. His home was built on land classified as Area C. Now, what does that mean? Under the Oslo Accords, signed in 1993 between the PLO and Israel, the West Bank was divided into three zones, A, B, and C. Area C is the largest of them, covering about 60% of the West Bank, and it remains under the Israeli security and civil control. The Israeli authorities justified demolitions in Area C by saying that homes and buildings they require permits from the Israeli civil administrations. But in practice, these permits are almost impossible for Palestinians to obtain. So families like Firas's, who built on their own land, live under constant threat of demolition. The promise on Oslo was that control over areas B and C would gradually be transferred to the Palestinians. But that never happened. Instead, Israel tightened its grip on Area C, expanding settlement and shrinking Palestinian presence there. Over time, it has become a deliberate policy aimed at emptying this land of their people. And that's where Firas built his home, with hope, with sacrifice, believing it would be safe. But living in Area C meant living with demolition always looming on the horizon.
I had to pay so much money and sacrifice so many things. The house was 280 meters, a stone villa. With the furniture and everything, it cost around 1 million shekel. But it was never about the money. What matters is the psychological pain, the suffering, and the damage that we went through. My family is made up of 8. Me, my wife, and 6 children. One of them, my 15-year-old son, has autism. I had planned to add 2 more floors in the future for my kids. That was my dream. And then, the Israelis destroyed it.
Every stone Firas laid carried a dream. Breakfast in the morning, heading to work, the kids off to school, and when he come back, the smell of food, the laughter of his children. That was a life. Me too. I was born in Jenin refugee camp, in the north of the West Bank. I grew up in a house full of life, living with my grandparents. My mornings always began with a cup of tea. After tea, my grandfather would take me up to the roof to look out over the camp. He'd point to the house and tell me the stories of what they had lived through. Let me go back to my house and let me describe it to you. It was 3 stories. The first 2 floors for my uncles, and our family lived on the top floor. Our house was 6 rooms and a living room. As soon as entered, to the right was the sitting room, the place where we would all gather. It was the largest room in the house, where my family came together for every occasion. There was a big fish tank decorating the living room, a TV always tuned to the news, and in winter, a wood-burning heater in the center, where we would all sit around for warmth. Our house was full of details, with decoration in every corner. But some of those decorations weren't chosen by us. They were left by the occupation, brutally etched into our walls. A missile had hit our living room during the invasion my grandfather always told me about in 2002. He would take me to the roof, pointing to the roads where the tanks rolled in, the spot where they fired shell into the camp, and describing how planes hovered above their home, threatening bombings and assassination if orders weren't obeyed. Those stories weren't just history, they were written into the walls of our house. Because our home stood tall, one of the highest in the camp, right in the middle of clashes between the youth and the occupation, it was exposed to attacks. Bullets scared the entire facade, shrapnel tore into the furniture, and countless traces of fire and metal were engraved into our home. In 2009, Firas received a sudden and ambiguous order from the occupation court to halt construction of his house. No clear reason was given other than the fact that house was being built in Area C, which is under full Israeli control. For Firas, he wasn't just building a house, he was building a sense of safety for his family, especially for his son with autism. And I know exactly what it means for a home to be a refuge, particularly when everything around you feels under threat. But the threat never stopped, not for Firas and not for me.
I was served a demolition order, and I only had 3 days to file an appeal. Of course, I responded. I hired a lawyer hoping to extend the deadline and apply for a permit, but the Israelis refused. It could happen after a year, 6 months, 2 years, or many years later. That's exactly what happened to us. 15 years after the first order, the demolition finally came.
The fear that Firas lived through, I experienced it in a different way. 2023, the riots on Jenin camp intensified, and the danger to residents' lives grew. The activities of the camp's youth resisting the occupation had become a source of concern for Israeli leaders. Rumors started spreading about forced displacement plans for the camp's residents, which only magnified the fear and anxiety everyone felt. And with that fear came painful, haunting questions. Where will we go? Where will we live? Will everything we've lived through become nothing but memories? Memories that will only bring us to tears for the rest of our lives.
On that same day, May 5th, around 10 in the morning, my daughter called me from home. She was screaming and crying. The idea of my house being demolished wasn't even on my mind. It wasn't something I ever expected or considered possible. I left work immediately and called my lawyer. I told him, the bulldozers are right at my door. They told my wife she had 5 minutes to leave the house with the children. If there was gold, money, or personal papers, she had to take them out quickly. Then they demolished the house. We ended up with nothing. No shelter, no roof, just the street.
Firas has a son with autism, and he was the one most deeply affected by the demolition. Years of therapy and progress vanished in an instant. As Firas tells us, his son changed overnight. He became irritable, aggressive, and stopped responding to them. His entire life was turned upside down.
Children with autism get used to a very specific routine, a certain behavior, a particular room where they sleep. Even changing his bed could mean he wouldn't sleep at all. He had his own world, his own way of life.
The moment of demolition, it's unforgettable. The explosions and demolitions began officially on January 21st, 2025. Day after day, we watched the rubble pile up. The destruction was brutal. 21 houses of our relatives and neighbors were demolished. When it came time for our own house to fall, we climbed the hill overlooking the camp, just like anyone else who had lost their home, watching from afar, as the bulldozer crushed not just stones, but memories, a family, and dreams.
The house we live in now is just 2 rooms, a kitchen and a bathroom. It's very cramped, but that's all we have given the economic and political conditions we face here in Palestine. Since the day our house was demolished until today, I go there every single day and sit by it. My son with autism, almost every single day, poor thing, he goes too. He just stands there, staring at what used to be our home. We once had stability, safety in our house, in our lives, in our work, but everything turned upside down, socially, psychologically, and financially.
I lived in the camp for 22 years. Every detail of my life, studying, learning, growing, shaping who I am. I was rooted there. The smell of the always still reminds me of my achievements, of the moments I lived in that space. But because of the injustice of the occupation, I was stripped of all those memories when my house was destroyed. I had no choice but to move to a village outside Jenin. Life completely changed. Family and friends scattered. The joyful gatherings disappeared. And yet, despite all the pain, despite the cruelty we witnessed, our love for the land only grew stronger. We didn't give up. We held on to the dream, to the neighborhood, and to the memories. Firas and I, each of us lost a house, but neither of us lost the dream. The dream of return, of rebuilding, of reviving the memories that were erased. A house can be torn down stone by stone, but it can never be demolished from the heart. When a house falls, it takes a piece of our soul, but from the rubble and broken memories, we rise and rebuild. This is not just Firas's stories or mine. It's the story of every Palestinian who built on hope and faced destruction with patient and unwavering will to live.